This is the Resistance Report for March 7th, 2017. Throughout his campaign, Donald Trump promised that there would be a repeal of the Affordable Care Act and it would be replaced with something, he said, wonderful. Well, now Republicans are trying to come up with that replacement. It's not so wonderful, judging by what House Republicans have come up with. Now, we don't know how bad it is because there's no opportunity to have a cost estimate or an estimate of how much coverage anybody's going to get under this new bill, but it will be marked up tomorrow in committee, and the plan is to vote on it either later this week or early next week. Now, to give you some idea of the extraordinary nature of this, I just want you to know that the original Affordable Care Act took months and months and months and months of hearings and detailed assessments from the Congressional Budget Office, from the Office of Management and Budget, from experts, and even then there were more hearings. Here, the Republicans are trying to come up with something that will affect the health care coverage of tens of millions of Americans, potentially 32 or 34 million Americans, and there are no hearings. There is no assessment. The Congressional Budget Office will not even have a chance to weigh in. The only thing that this particular bill, or these two bills to be technical about it, have going for them is the possibility that they can get in fast, speed, right through the House and then through the Senate without anybody paying all that much attention. The fact of the matter is that if you were talking about a real replacement for Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, that does as much as the Affordable Care Act, you can't do it without having two sources of money in the Affordable Care Act that the Republicans want to get rid of. One source of money is higher taxes on the wealthy. They want to repeal those taxes. We'll get to that in a moment. The other source of money has to do with a mandate that younger and healthier Americans buy health insurance or they face a penalty for not doing so. Without them in the insurance pool, it is almost, in fact, it is impossible to afford what it is that Obama provided and Trump is promising in terms of anybody with pre-existing conditions having health care coverage. The mathematics are such that you can't do it without those two sources of money coming in. Those taxes and healthy people buying into insurance. What that means is that the Republican plan, almost by necessity, whether it's called subsidies or it's a refundable tax credit, whatever you call it, for poorer people, for lower income people, including a lot of Trump voters, there's just not going to be enough there to cover them when they need it for medical exams and for medical emergencies or for anything else. It won't be there. Their premiums are going to be higher. The co-payments and deductibles are going to be much higher. There is just not the resources and revenues necessary to do what Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, did do. It's also true of people with pre-existing conditions. If you have had a pre-existing condition, somebody in your family has had it, a cancer or some other pre-existing condition, well, you're out of luck. You're back to where you were square one before Obamacare, before the Affordable Care Act. Because even though the Republicans are saying that people with pre-existing conditions are covered, there's nothing and no revenue source in the bills that they are providing that would cover people with pre-existing conditions. Because they are higher health risks. And insurance companies, private, for-profit insurance companies, are going to necessarily charge them more. And if there are not people in that healthcare pool who are younger and healthier, then it will be much higher premiums that make health care and health insurance inaccessible for people with pre-existing conditions, and also large co-payments and even larger deductibles. In other words, you've got millions and millions of people, poor people, people with pre-existing conditions, people also on Medicaid. Many people who took advantage of, in states that took advantage of the Medicaid expansion, they also are out of luck because this new bill provides, oh yes, a 3-year time period where Medicaid in those expansion states is still provided, but after that, it's gone. And by the way, even people with Medicaid, what they get under this new House bill is essentially a state grant that doesn't grow in proportion to what our expected growth of healthcare costs is, as more and more elderly people, as the baby boomers, reach retirement age and have all kinds of healthcare problems. Obviously, healthcare costs are going to go up, but Medicaid recipients, everybody else who is on any kind of a refundable tax credit or Medicaid under the House bill is out of luck. They are not going to keep up with those expanding healthcare costs. That's what the replacement looks like. Oh, did I mention there is one group that is going to really do extremely well? They're called rich people. The very wealthiest people in the United States are going to get big, big tax cuts. In fact, the richest 1% will get an average cut of $33,000 per year. If you're in the top 1% of Americans, you earn more than about $280,000, $300,000, you are going to get a tax cut, a special, almost a gift from the Republicans, $33,000. If you're in the richest 1/10 of 1%, you're way up there, millions of dollars a year in earnings, you're going to get an average tax cut of $197,000 from the Republicans because of this so-called replacement for Obamacare. And if you're among the 400 richest Americans, guess what your tax cut is going to be because what the Republicans are going to do. Your tax cut is going to be an average of $7 million per year. In other words, what this amounts to is a huge transfer of wealth from the sicker people and poorer people of America to people who are healthier and wealthier. Just as one example, buried in the bill is a provision that ends a cap on the deductibility of executive compensation in health insurance companies. In the Obamacare Affordable Care Act bill, there was a limit placed on how much these health insurance companies could deduct from their own corporate income taxes each year on the basis of how much they paid out to their executives. No more than $500,000. Any executive pay in excess of $500,000, they had to eat. They couldn't deduct it. They would not get a subsidy in terms of the tax code. But what happens here in this House bill, buried on page 37 of the House bill, is a provision that gets rid of that cap, which means, for example, the CEO of Aetna Health Insurance, one of the biggest, earned last year $17 million. Aetna could deduct from its corporate taxes only $500,000 of that $17 million, but under this gift, this windfall given by House Republicans, Aetna can deduct all $17 million. What does this mean? This amounts to billions of dollars. Overall, all health insurers, all CEOs, all executives of health insurance companies, and that is money that's coming from taxpayers. That's money that is not actually going to pay for health care for people who are poorer, people who have pre-existing conditions, people who are needier in this country. No. It's part of the great transfer from the sicker and the poorer to the wealthier and the healthier. Now, there is an opportunity here for Democrats, if they take it, to make a very strong case for something the Democrats ought to have been arguing for years now, and that is a single-payer health care plan. You see what's happening. Big health insurers, like Aetna, like United, like Humana, and others, 5, 6, 7 big health insurers, they are merging, or they are trying to merge. They already have a large percentage of the healthcare market. They're merging, and as they merge, as they get larger and larger, their power increases. That's why they could, last year, several of them that could say, we are not even going to participate any longer in the Affordable Care Act unless we get a better deal. That's what that merger wave is all about in healthcare, getting a better deal for them and their shareholders, which means a worse deal for taxpayers and people who are buying health insurance. But while there is more and more consolidation among health insurers, and we're talking about for-profit, private health insurers, what's happening on the other side is that individuals are losing their bargaining power. If we no longer have an Affordable Care Act, there is no longer any power on the part of consumers of health care, individuals, to actually push back against these big insurers. That's why we need to move toward what's called a single-payer plan, Medicare for all. The costs of this move would be very low. In fact, Medicare has administrative costs that are far lower than the administrative costs of private for-profit health insurers. You've got to understand this, because this is a big deal. Right now, about 30% of the costs of private for-profit health insurers is on administration, on billing, on making sure that they are billing the next insurance company or the hospital or the other provider. It is all a very large, complicated system in which billing and keeping track of all of the costs is a huge cost in and of itself. And then on top of that, you've got advertising and marketing, because all of these private for-profit healthcare and health insurance companies, what do they want to do? They want to find healthy people, and they want to avoid sick people. You heard me right. We now have, even under Obamacare, even under the Affordable Care Act, basically a health insurance system in this country that is designed to avoid sick people. That's why we had to put out a special provision for pre-existing conditions, because otherwise the health insurers will charge an arm and a leg or will not even cover people to begin with. They want to find groups of people who are healthy, who will not cost very much. That's what this is all about. And so the advertising and marketing and administrative costs and the costs of executives, the CEOs that are making $17 million a year, all of that is a cost that you pay and I pay as taxpayers or as people who are buying health insurance. Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act did push against that. And it is a valuable step in the right direction, but we must move toward a single-payer healthcare system. Every other advanced country has something like it. Our neighbors to the north in Canada have a single-payer system, and it is doing very well. We are paying 18% right now of our total national income for health care and health insurance, and yet we have millions of people, 30, 40, 50 million people, depending on what estimate you're looking at with regard to what coverage, who are not covered or fully covered, and at the same time, we have a healthcare crisis in this country. So why not use this right now as an opportunity? Conservative Republicans, the Freedom Caucus in the House, they are screaming bloody murder. They don't want the replacement, so-called, that the House Republicans have come up with, because they think it gives away too much. They just want to get rid of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. So why shouldn't Democrats say, all right, You want to do that? Then we're going to have a single-payer plan. We're going to do it right this time. Stand up to the Republicans. Stand up to Trump. It's the only way. A single-payer plan is the only way we can afford to cover everyone and do it cheaply and provide good coverage. That's what we have learned from other nations. Everybody is affected by these rising healthcare costs. Everybody, including you, has a stake in a system that is more rational. Don't believe for a minute that Trump and the Republicans are actually replacing the Affordable Care Act with something that is better. It is far, far worse. That ends the Resistance Report tonight. I will see you tomorrow.